Hello, dear class. Good evening. It's evening here anyway, but still sunshine on the little swampy area beyond our little lawn in our backyard. Wonderful, bright sunshine on the trees. The wind has swept everything clear. In fact, if I look a little more wind-blown than usual, which isn't maybe possible, it's because I was out there trying to work in the great outdoors at a table with this huge wind blowing, but determined to get some air and even a bit of sunshine. But fresh air is supposed to be good for you under the current threats to our health, or the one threat to our health. So I'm recording this little video on the subject of Sebastian Barry's The Secret Scripture, not because you need anything unraveled. There is an unraveling to come in this book, which will explain and justify itself, and I'm certainly not going to hint at it. But there's no mystery here. It's not the kind of book as I guess Beckett's work or Joyce's might be, that could do with a lot of critical commentary and explanation of the possible meanings of things. This is a simple book about relatively simple people in an impossibly difficult time. And Barry has thought up some awful, savage situations in which to put people. You haven't read the half of it yet. I mean, you've read the half of it, but not the half of it in terms of what people, the characters that you've come to know, and I hope be a little fond of what they go through. And really, this book is a simple dialectic between a harsh story, a realistic, but potentially depressing story, and some of the greatest narrative art. I'm thinking of music as well as literature, and there's a narrative element in paintings too, of course. But those arts that primarily exist in time, that's their first home, not as with painting as their secondary home. They exist in time, of course. But where time is the key factor in narrative, there is always potentially a dialectic when you're dealing with a tragic work or a tragic theme between the disheartening, the saddening effects of a sad story or a sad piece of music. Any of you who are familiar with the music of Mahler wrote a famous song sequence called Kindertotenlieder, songs for the death of children. And it's as sad a subject as you could ever write music for. But the beauty of the music uplifts us and acts as a counterweight to the awful meditation represented by the death of children. So if you listen to the music, you might be crying in honor of the subject and perhaps of your own familiarity with the death of children, or even just the potential death of a child. But you will also feel exalted by the capacity of humanity to create these wonderful things, artworks, that allow us to address even the most terrible subjects, and have been, and I think always will be, a source of great comfort for people who have experienced terrible losses. You find in books such a deep echo and understanding of your pain that they become as good friends as any human friends. I mean, they are human. Books are human. They're created by humans. So I just wanted to remind you, and I'm sure before this reading is over, I would like you to find me a couple of sentences that struck you in the same way. I was struck reading it this time by just a couple of very simple sentences on a simple subject. it's Roseanne talking about the Sir Thomas Browne book that she has, which is a sacred object to her. And it with the book come strange names, the names of the printers: Sampson Low, son, and Marston. And she says that son was beautiful. The son of Sampson Low. Who was he? Who was he? Did he labour under the whip of his father, or was he treated with gentleness and respect? J. W. Willis Bund supplied the notes. And here's the sentence I love. Names, names, all passed away, forgotten, mere bird song in the bushes of things. It's so wonderful. Mere birdsong in the bushes of things. Twitter, tweets, before those two words got caught up in the hideous thing that is contemporary culture. The little cheeping, let's go back to cheeping and chirping, that you hear from the bushes, anonymity. And of course, for Roseanne, and coming from Roseanne, these thoughts, the sense of passing unremembered into history, into the past, unrecorded, mere birdsong in the bushes of things is very close. She's 100, maybe around then, years old, on the verge of eternity. And these are the kinds of things that occupy your mind, I would imagine. I don't yet feel myself to be on the verge of eternity. I might look like it to you. I might. But I don't feel myself to be anywhere near eternity yet. At the same time, I feel strongly that eternity is always right there. And if it isn't, then I think we're wasting an opportunity to understand life in a particular way that is beautiful, to embrace the transience of things. I'm conscious. I look immediately over your head. I'm going to show it to you. I don't know if you can see it. I'm pointing my camera at my view. I see this wonderful view. I don't know whether I'm holding the camera still enough for you to see that beyond these fences lies some not very remarkable ground, and then wonderful trees in the sunset. Pines, because the deciduous trees have not yet developed leaf. But what beautiful things. Pines are incredibly vulnerable. It was only late in my life that I discovered that pines are not strongly rooted, and your pine can fall over at any gust of wind, even if it stood there for a generation or two. But there's that beautiful view which leads me towards the closeness to eternity that Roseanne feels, and it leads me towards a sense of wishing to be grateful for my life, which I am, and I would not feel anything else in view of the fact that these are my last years. There may be a great many of them yet. So the other sentence that struck me is when Dr. Green is talking about his wife's funeral, and this terrifying thing that there's something wrong with. This was the funeral. I'm sorry, this isn't Dr. Green at all. This is Roseanne talking about her father's funeral. And we know that there are two extraordinarily different accounts of events in Roseanne's remote past. I would have asked you to arbitrate between them if I'd thought there was any purpose in that. That on the one hand, it is recorded that people took Roseanne's father a former policeman, which he could have been. He would have changed into being. He would have left the police by the time Roseanne was old enough to know what he was doing. He was the grave groundskeeper. But they took him in revenge that never ceased for at least a generation in Ireland. They took him up to the little tower, from which Roseanne remembers him throwing hammers and feathers. And the reality which is recorded is that men took him up there to throw him out. And he fought, and the little girl was down there looking up. And they killed him with the hammers. And it's at that moment easy to resolve that by saying, well, that's clearly what happened. And Roseanne has placed in front of it what Sigmund Freud called a screen memory, a memory that is false and replaces the awful thing you don't want to remember, which you've told another story in your head, not consciously. It's a symbolic representation, the feathers, the falling hammer, and according to the record, the hammer fell and hit her on the head, which means that we're able to say, oh, she dreamt it all, but it seems much more likely that it was a psychological recourse that she took. And of course, there are quite a few things that don't fit in Roseanne's account, and Dr. Green is encouraging us to be a little skeptical about Roseanne's account, but who knows with whom the truth is. She describes herself as finding in her father's face, in his coffin, that someone had pierced each eyeball with a tiny black arrow taken from the Ansonia clock that had been her mother's. I plucked them out again like thorns, like bee stings. I do not know what they were tokens of. And if true, it's an indication of that terrible hatred between the Irish revolutionaries and the police who represented the English. And of course, a Presbyterian family was already suspicious. They weren't good Catholics, as the revolutionaries would have been. They were perhaps on the side of the Anglo-Irish, who were basically Protestants. So this terrible account, if true, shows how the awful hatred continued. And she talks about the mourners. And she describes then in a very short paragraph, she says, my head was aflame with the deep, dark pulse of grief that beats like a physical pain, like a rat got into your brains, a rat on fire. Which, of course, that terrible story, again, if true, of the rat that escaped when her father was killing rats in his subsequent job after the gravekeeper as a rat catcher, and the terrible tragedy that ensued, the rat that escaped, caught on fire, set fire to the girls in their flimsy dresses, set fire to the building, and those terrible deaths of those young girls, the most awful thing imaginable, for which, in some sense, her father was responsible and was bound to feel himself to be responsible, and which, at least in Roseanne's mind, fueled his death, although there were plenty of other things, the utter dead-end misery of his marriage, which parallels the misery of Dr. Green in his own dead-end marriage. Suddenly ended, suddenly, out of nowhere, Bet chokes, Bet dies, Bet has an embolism, an aneurysm, a seizure, and is gone. And those two marriages, Dr. Green's marriage and Roseanne's parents' marriage, parallel each other as we go forwards. Not happy stories, but they are themes beautifully woven. And I hope you're enjoying the extraordinary beauty of the fabric as we proceed through the book. Thank you for your patience if you are, and I do hope you're enjoying it if you are. Keep safe. Be well, please.